Cool. Chris, thank you very much for joining me on the Scoot Space today. What we will be discussing today is part of the incident response spin-off series that we're doing here on the podcast. And a really good one today, it's surviving incident response, and it's tips and tricks from a real life person who work in incident response who can share with us how essentially you cope and your coping strategies and how you can switch off at the end of the day in what is, a very sort of, you know, intense job. So, before we get into it, Chris, are you okay just to give the audience a little bit of a background to yourself?
Yeah, of course. And thanks for inviting me on the podcast, Nick. So my name's Chris Caldwell. I'm currently an incident response consultant at an IR firm called Aceris. I've been in the world of incident response or digital forensics and incident response for around 7 years or so now. So started off working within law enforcement for a few years, slowly moved towards defence, and then moved towards the private sector in the last couple of years or so. So I've had a few varied roles over the years. That's my sort of background up until now.
Yeah, perfect, no problem. Was the plan always to go into incident response, or was it just to get into cyber and see from there, or not even any of the above?
No, probably none of the above. So I originally studied physics at university and came out of that and realised I wanted absolutely nothing to do with physics in the real world. Didn't want to go into a career like that. Sort of fell into a job for an IT company, developing insurance software. And then after about 3 years of that, I realized I wanted to go into forensic science. I had no real knowledge at that point that it was going to be digital forensics. I would have happily gone in and done fingerprints or something like that. But I guess the forensics masters and then mixed with my IT background at that point, digital forensics became a bit of a kind of natural path for me. And the more I looked into it, the more it really excited me and got into it from there. Yeah. And I think digital forensics kind of just sort of led me into incident response, really. Very sort of similar types of topics, and I think the skills certainly there's a lot of overlap between the two. So that's how I kind of fell into IR, I suppose.
Yeah. No, honestly, the amount of people that say they fell into cyber and then fell into this, it is just one of them industries, I think.
Exactly.
But yeah, okay, cool. So that's obviously how you got into it. So talk to me about some of the talk to me about what a day to day looks like for you then working in incident response. What does it look like?
Yeah, so for me, because we're a consultancy, we deal with companies who've had sort of confirmed cyber attacks. So a lot of people work in IR, but for like sort of in-house for their company, and a lot of the time they're probably not dealing with incidents. But for us, it is purely incidents. Companies like I say, have confirmed cyber attacks. So day to day for me is really the incident response kind of life cycle. So it might be the initial kind of dealing with clients, understanding what their problems are, what's actually happened. It could be data collection type work, or it could be the investigation. So understanding what's happened, obviously depending on what the type of case is, or it could be then the reporting back to them. So either writing written reports or jumping on calls and advising them. So it can be a bit varied. There's different steps of the investigations, but yes, every day is working on different cyber investigations.
Okay. So obviously, with that being said, then it is obviously seen as a high stress environment. So talk to me about, obviously, is there a difference in material, i.e. when it comes to the public sector, to the private sector? Is there, some, when you see a job sort of come onto your desk and you're like, oh, this is going to be, quite a taxing one in terms of emotionally for you. Is that a sort of thing that can happen for you?
I mean, definitely from the public sector work. So my time in law enforcement, it was split between the first couple of years at the Home Office, and then I worked for an operational police unit in Bristol. There was lots of kind of that emotionally distressing material. So in the Home Office, there was a fair amount of terrorist content that I would be reviewing, and then in working for the police, there was lots of I worked on predominantly child abuse cases. So you end up seeing obviously an awful lot of distressing type material, obviously within an environment that help you. There are mechanisms in place to help you cope with those sorts of things.
Yeah. And so elaborate a little bit further. What are their sort of mechanisms then?
So I think, a big one is that you're in a team and you're not going through it on your own, and that there really is a team spirit in those sorts of environments. And like it sounds silly and people talk about, I don't know, using things like dark humor and stuff like that, but like, yeah, without being in that sort of environment, it's hard to explain what it's like. You're sort of all going through this, I guess, kind of horrible experience together.
Yeah.
But I mean, both of those roles I was in, they had professional help. So you'd see a psychologist every 3 months, I think it was, and they're just brilliant. They work with people going through this stuff all the time. Particularly in the police, they're not just helping us dealing with those cases. They're helping frontline police officers and people are going out to crime scenes all the time, just helping and understand. Helping with different coping mechanisms, and if you're struggling with anything, they're obviously there to listen as well. But yeah, I definitely learned loads from them about just ways to cope, things I'd never really thought of. Some of it seems really simple when you think about it. Some of it's a lot more I'd never would have probably thought of myself. So just little things like, at the end of the day, I remember a psychologist telling me, just get changed. As soon as you get through the front door, get changed. And it's like, you're changing from going from work Chris into home life Chris. And just that little thing of getting changed, or something. They'd say some people have a bath or something when you get home. Just the ability to kind of reset and go back into normal life and try and leave those horrible things you've seen at work, leave them at work.
Yep.
Yeah, there are loads of different things. So they'd say, don't listen to the same type of music, for example. So like in our police unit, we had a group Spotify playlist, and it would just be full of all kinds of stuff, most of stuff I'd never listened to on my own. But it just meant that, I'd heard that music, I was sort of in work mode. And when I got home and listened to my own stuff or my, podcasts and things, it doesn't sort of bring you back to being in that high stress environment. Lots of really good advice that came out of those sessions. So that was obviously a great help, and it helps you get through it.
Absolutely. And like you say, even just in life, we have anchors, don't we, for memories. We have associations. Like you say, a particular smell can bring you back to a certain happy memory, something like that. But it's what we sort of discussed on our first chat actually before the podcast is a little bit about the dramaturgical model and how we have these different masks for these different scenarios. And I've got my work self, and then I've got myself with my relationship, myself with my parents. We've all got them. But I suppose yours has to be that even more defined. And do you think that has it ever seeped into another part of your life? Have you ever come home particularly stressed, and then you've had sort of like a row with a friend or with your partner or anything like that? Has it ever seeped in because of work, not just because you're a bit hungry or something like that?
Yeah. Yeah, of course. I mean, like with every job, there are good days and bad days. It's just, I guess the bad days can be kind of extra bad. My wife's really understanding, and if I'm in particularly when I was working in those sorts of environments, she was good at, if I came home and I was clearly in a bit of a bad mood or stressed, say, then she was good at kind of, because a lot of the time you don't really want to talk about it at home, because you don't want to bring that home and inflict that sort of stuff on your partner. And because I had those mechanisms at work to speak to people, and like the team, we were really good at speaking to each other. I felt that I didn't need to bring that home, if you know what I mean. So that was really good. But yeah, of course there were times, I'm sure there were times that I, fell out with her or rowed about something just trivial. Just because I had a bad day. I think a lot of people probably do that anyway, don't they?
Absolutely. No, it's all just kind of surmise what's been said so far. So obviously a few tips is putting them sort of like hurdles in place, like, okay, we're at the end of the work day, have a bath, get changed, don't listen to the same music. But when it comes to the communicate with people going through it at the same, like who have them shared experiences with you on your team. Like you say, you can engage in that dark humor with that team, because like you say, you're going through it together, and you both understand the context behind it. So with that being said, then, when it comes to instant response, is there a particular character or a particular personality type that you might have took for granted, because you might have just been like, okay, yeah, no, it's just what I do, it's very laid back. But for some people coming into this high stress environment, it's not as easy for them to switch off at the end of the day. It's not as easy for them to blend it. So what sort of character do you think suits instant response?
So I think in terms of that, being able to leave things at work, it's that sort of resilience. And some people, I guess, are maybe more suitable to that, but it is something you also build up over time, just through having those mechanisms in place and just being essentially just getting used to working in high stress environments, I guess. There's also other kind of characteristics, the things you'd think of about being someone who's good at having, say, a really good attention to detail. You're often looking for really small things, working under pressure. So I get, they're things that, I'm sure people are probably more suitable to than others, but a lot of it, I think, just comes with experience. But by the time you've done a handful of investigations, you sort of know what you're going to expect, and you're able to probably deal with that a little bit better.
Yeah.
I think a big one as well is knowing sort of who you can lean on in those times. If you're really struggling at work, if something's stressful, or you're struggling emotionally with something, it's who you can go to. So whether it's colleagues, or it might be that your partner is the person you speak to when you're super stressed at work, but having those sorts of in place, I think is really important.
Yeah. No, very, very interesting points. Like you say, resilience, and having the attention to detail, but having that emotional crutch at times as well, just to kind of prop you back up. So really important segment. I'm really glad we sort of like got through that, and I think it was really good sort of information there. So just to move it on a little bit then, Chris. So when it comes to, I know you mentioned you've worked in the public sector and in the private sector then. So what's the difference then? Obviously, you worked in the public sector, it can be quite sort of intense, terrorism, child abuse, that sort of good stuff, bad stuff even. When it comes to the private sector, how is that different?
So I think it's stressed in a different way. I think you get a lot of like for us, we deal with clients, so there's that. You're having interactions with the clients. They're obviously paying you for a service. They expect high levels of that service. They often expect things especially quickly, particularly at times of when there's been a cyber incident. It really is super urgent for some of these companies. It's the business is on hold until we sort it out. It might be that all their data has been encrypted, for example. They literally can't operate until we finish our investigation. So you're dealing with that kind of client management side, which I think can be quite stressful. It always feels like you're working. Everything needed to be done yesterday, if you know what I mean. There's never sort of time to actually do anything. It's everything's sort of super fast paced.
How do you sort of appease them people?
So I think it's just, setting expectations from the start is a big one. If you, it's difficult because you don't want to give timescales, because until you sort of get into the data and get into the analysis, you don't really know how long things are going to take. You can give rough estimates, but really setting out expectations at the start, but then just providing updates as you go along. I think pretty much all clients in my that I've dealt with have been understanding. If you give them updates, here's what we've got to, here's what we've done so far, here's where we might be getting held up. Just keeping them in the loop, making them understand you're not hiding anything from them. You're not trying to dismiss them or anything. You are working on their case for them, and just keeping them informed. Really, I think that's a key to a good sort of client engagement relationship.
Okay, and are you normally met with warmth? Are you met with reluctance? Are you met with anger? What's the normal reaction to you guys walking into a room?
I think I've had all of those. The normal reaction, I think, is one of they want your help. A lot of companies are very receptive to help. They're obviously paying us, but they understand that we are there to help them, and we try and make that really clear, that we are there for them, to help them get back on their feet, to understand what the incident was, and ultimately we want to leave them in a better place than when we started. So most of the time it's that. You do occasionally get like reluctance from some clients. They don't want you meddling in their business. Sometimes we'll have IT teams who don't think that the company their company should have got an external party involved, for example, and they sort of don't. They feel like maybe we're coming in to mark their homework a little bit. So you do get a little bit of that, but generally, I'd say on the whole, people are we're quite well received by clients.
Yeah. Okay. The more we talk, the more I'm saying it. This seems like a role that demands a huge amount of emotional intelligence, and this is before even getting onto the technical side of things. With that, the getting the character and the personality and the soft skills right. Obviously, I'm thinking as a recruiter as well. For someone working in IR, seems like a mammoth task before even getting onto can they do the job. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. And I think before I got into consultancy work, you'd see adverts and they'd say, must have this technical experience and must have experience in consultancy. And I'd always think, but why does that matter? If you've worked in an IR role, why does it matter if you've been a consultant? But now being in it, I totally get it. I completely get, like you say, those soft skills. I didn't appreciate at all how important they are for working in IR until I got into it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because again, time and time again, when I do these podcasts and we're talking about, cybersecurity incidents and whatnot, it, 9 times out of 10, it'll always relate back to a human behind a screen, and that's the reason for it. And yeah, then you've got spring in psychology because that's probably one going to be the core fault of it. So okay, really, really sort of interesting stuff then. So obviously, when it comes to you know you've got a massive sort of ransomware incident going on or whatever it may be, how do you sort of prepare for the chaos? How do you you know that you're coming into work and it is going to be intense? Like, what are some of your sort of like preparations for yourself before you go into it?
I think it's about just knowing what sort of plans you've got in place. So, like for us being an IR firm, obviously we've got lots of plans in place for working with instance. So I know exactly what types of tools I'm going to use. I know exactly what data I'm going to need. I know if I get stuck, who I can speak to because I've got obviously colleagues I can go to. So in that sense, we're kind of well set up. Obviously, not everyone's in that situation. A lot of people who work in IR work in house, and they maybe don't get many big incidents. So in that case, it's about having the right sort of plans in place. You hear a lot of companies having instant response plans, but how many of them are ever kind of properly tested? I'm not really sure. I know previously when I worked in a SOC, I sort of felt like I was ready for a big cyber incident if it came along. But whether I think sort of looking back now, I'm not really sure I would have been, at least not as prepared as I would have liked. I mean, a lot of it comes with practice. Just being in these sorts of scenarios, you know what sorts of things to expect. You know, it's one of those where every instance different, but there's so much similarity between them. If that kind of makes sense. That practice really does make perfect in this sort of case.
Yeah. So elaborate a little bit more on some like sort of the tools and the procedures that you use in IR then.
So we use a lot in our place. We use a lot of in-house tools, which is great because it's all developed in-house. And if you've got a problem, you can go to whoever developed it. I mean, there's a huge stack of security tools out there. A lot of them obviously have a lot of similar characteristics. There's pros and cons of every sort of tool, but yeah, there's whole sort of waves of different security tooling. It really depends on what sort of incident you're working with, and some of them are really bespoke. They'll be good at one really specific type of incident, and some are more sort of generalized, like catch-all type scenario.
Yeah. Okay, no, absolutely. And I just want to give you sort of a couple hypothetical situations as we sort of approach the last sort of 5-10 minutes. Is when you're in a role that requires a lot of firefighting. When do you get the job satisfaction working in IR? Is it just when that fire's put out? Because then the next day there's going to be a new fire on your desk. Like, where's the job satisfaction, or is it the fact that you can see? Do you not see it as firefighting? Do you see it as something different?
I think I do see it as firefighting. I think the job satisfaction, one big job satisfaction for me has been able to help these companies. Particularly, you often see them when they're at a very low point where they've been hit with a cyber attack and they're really struggling. Being able to come in and offer that help, get them back on their feet, and like I say, leave them in a better place than when we started is really nice to see. There's also the kind of personal, selfish job satisfaction. I've always had this thing of just wanting to solve the mystery, wanting to know the answer. I've always been one of those people that wants to know why something happened. So it's almost like you in an investigation when I get that kind of eureka moment of, oh yeah, I've worked it out.
Yeah.
That's the bit I really love from a selfish point of view.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, um, It makes perfect sense, and you need to have them sort of rewards. It's like you say, it comes down to again like a psychological trait. It's like smart goal setting. It's just like
Definitely.
okay, like what is success? What is success for me? Well, it's like it's seeing that the client is that they're in a better place than when I first sort of came into contact with them, and that is my job done. They might not be like absolutely future proof. No one is future proof, but do you know what I mean? You've done your job, and that's where your satisfaction is. Again, it relates back to what you do at the end of the day. I'm going to go home. I'm going to have a bath. I'm going to get changed. I'm going to listen to different music, and that's a successful outcome for you because you've done your bit. So it all links perfectly. It all makes sense, and there's a method to the madness more than anything.
Yeah, definitely.
So what would you do then in a hypothetical situation if your colleague that you're working with at Ceres, say they're struggling a little bit, say that you can see like okay, this is actually having quite an effect on them. What would you do? Would you pull them to one side? Would you, go to your manager? How would you sort of look out for one of your IR colleagues?
Yeah, so it's kind of difficult because you want to look out for your colleagues, but at the same time you don't maybe want to overstep your
Yeah.
mark. That I mean, for a lot of people, their work friends are work friends, if you know what I mean,
Yep.
and maybe not super close like you would be with family or close friends. It's difficult. I mean, I think helping colleagues understand what's in place to help them, and because it might be that a colleague doesn't want to speak to me because they don't feel comfortable speaking to me, but actually there could be different mechanisms in place, whether that be help they can get. There's obviously, outside of work, there's all kinds of free mental health services available for people to go and visit. Offering advice, I've been in roles where you've had that bad experience, or you've felt really stressed, being able to maybe offer some of the tips, like I said earlier.
Yep.
So I think it's a bit of a fine balance, really. Like I say, you don't want to overstep the mark with your colleagues and stick your nose in where it might not be wanted. So it's I think it's quite a difficult balancing act.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, it relates to it's emotional intelligence, and it's weighing up the context sort of on the day, weighing up the relationship that you have with them pre-existing, weighing up the relationship with that you have them outside of work, like you say. But as long as you sort of like have that, emotional intelligence, you'll be able to pick the right option. With that being said, so yeah, some really good information. One of my last questions for you, Chris, is there might be someone watching this, a graduate, or maybe even someone that's not even in security at the moment. They might be looking for a career in IR, and there's so many different avenues that you can get into it. Obviously, I've spoken to people that come via the police, come via SOC. You've come from having a science degree, then got into forensics. There's so many different ways. So, what would your advice be to maybe Chris 7, 8 years ago when he was starting, or for someone starting now, to have a successful and fruitful career in IR? What's the first steps, and how do they climb the ladder in this field?
Yeah, I think so. Some of it's about just sort of getting that first step on the ladder, getting your foot in the door. Like you say, plenty of people start from all sorts of different backgrounds. But once you're in, I think it's if IR is the direction you want to go in, it's sort of setting yourself up for that in the future by sort of volunteering where you can. So things like if you work you're in a SOC, for example, and you're at a level 1 SOC role, the you could just find an incident, pass it on, move on to the next incident. But if you're interested in diving into IR, it's really doing some of that work yourself. Even if you pass the incident on, and then go and do your own investigation into it, or go and ask the people who end up in where that incident ends up, can I shadow you? Can I learn from you? Asking for advice. So I think it's really just almost like putting your hand up and volunteering for any sort of IR type work that you can get involved in. I think is a really good way to get into it. And I think generally the people I've met in my journey, I've worked in a number of different roles, worked with a load of amazing people. I think one thing that really has been pretty much unanimous is everyone's so willing to help. I don't think I've ever worked with someone where if someone went to them and said, "Oh, I'm having a problem with this. Can you help me? Can you teach me how to do this?" that they'd ever say no. I think everyone's really keen to kind of spread the knowledge. I think it's such a fast-paced field. There's no one that's an expert. Sorry, excuse me. No one's an expert in everything. And even if they're an expert in everything today, in a year's time, there'll be so much new stuff they're not an expert in. That I think people are so willing to kind of share that knowledge and learn off each other, and it benefits everyone. And I think if you're a junior person coming in, that's absolutely ideal. Just try and soak up as much of that knowledge as you can, and really sort of learn off your colleagues really.
Perfect. No, an absolutely fantastic point to end on there, Chris. And there's lots and lots of really good information we can take away from this podcast. So, if anybody has any questions or anything that's raised today that you might want to, maybe grab Chris for 5 minutes and just ask him a few more questions about it, I'll be sure to put all his information down below. But once again, Chris, thanks so much for jumping on the Scooter Space.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me, Nick.